in a groundbreaking action that has rocked the royal sphere and British politics. The UK Parliament has chosen to banish Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from the UK forever. Once cherished figures within the royal clan, they now confront a total exclusion from the nation that defined their public existence. So, what events precipitated this momentous ruling, and how will this transform the royal institution? What are the implications for Harry and Meghan in the years to come? Join us as we explore the startling action taken by the UK Parliament regarding Harry and Meghan. A silence so deep it seemed almost supernatural descended upon the chamber. And it was the sort of stillness that arrives only once in a generation. Parliament members, usually raucous, loud, and perpetually arguing during votes, stood completely motionless as the Speaker of the House approached the dispatch box. His typically steady and unwavering voice trembled just a little. He announced the results clearly with 347 votes in support and 216 opposing. The proposal to formally banish Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from the United Kingdom had succeeded. And the magnitude of the majority shocked even the strongest advocates of the plan. For a fleeting second, nothing stirred in the massive room. Then the chamber exploded, not with applause or jeers, but with a much more peculiar noise. A low, expanding murmur moved across the seats like a spreading fire. It was a shared gasp of incredulity combined with grim acceptance. A sound suggesting shock more than victory. Outdoors, the chill December breeze at Westminster carried the urgent yells of reporters who had been positioned there since early morning. With phones in hand, they raced to broadcast the update within 90 seconds. Every major news channel around the world had paused their schedules to announce what had just transpired. For years, pundits in the United States had proposed that Britain was too courteous and hesitant to ever adopt such an extreme measure. Today, that hypothesis was shown to be catastrophically incorrect. What made the ballot so stunning was not just the result but the rapidity with which it had been carried out. The bill had been presented merely 6 days prior, discussed in private for 72 hours, and taken to the main floor with barely any public alert. Every customary rule of parliamentary process had been ignored. In modern times, exile bills, if they occur at all, require months of debate, consideration, and meticulous bargaining. This specific one, however, had dropped like a blade, for it was quick, distinct, and conclusive. Inside Downing Street, assistants to the Prime Minister rushed to align their statements with Buckingham Palace. The schedule of the vote had been meticulously organized. King Charles was present at a private event in Scotland, guaranteeing nobody could blame him for swaying Parliament personally. Prince William was secure in Windsor, having cleared his diary with great care. Princess Anne was in Edinburgh, meaning the senior royals had orchestrated a purposeful absence from London. This quiet arrangement conveyed much more than any official announcement ever could. Yet, perhaps the most telling response came from those who had fought most vigorously for this result. Senior Conservative politicians, many representing districts where public anger toward the Sussexes had become perilously high, voiced quiet comfort instead of victory. One representative, talking off the record to a journalist, stated plainly that this was not regarding penalty but regarding existence. The monarchy is unable to operate while 2 of its past members conduct battle from overseas. That expression, wage war, would command the news cycle for the remainder of the day. Across the ocean in Montecito, California, Harry and Meghan were awakening to a bad dream they had long been cautioned about but refused to accept could ever occur. Contacts near the pair claim Meghan noticed the notification first. She had been glancing at her phone during the morning meal when the breaking news alert lit up the display. For several seconds, she just gazed, paralyzed. Then, without speaking, she passed the device to Harry. It was not that the decision was unexpected, but that it was actual, permanent, and unchangeable. The legal ramifications were instant and harsh. Under the conditions of the ruling, Harry and Meghan were prohibited from entering the United Kingdom for a minimum of 10 years. With potential continuations to be assessed by Parliament, any effort to come back would incite immediate detention and removal. Their real estate in Britain, including Frogmore Cottage, would be taken by the Crown Estate. Their surviving ceremonial ranks, already devoid of official tasks, would be formally voided. Even their kids, Archie and Lilibet, would confront limitations on travel to the UK until they attained maturity and could apply separately. By midday, Buckingham Palace released a declaration so brief it seemed nearly frigid in its shortness. The issue is one for Parliament and the administration, and the royal family will proceed to concentrate on its obligations. How did they reach this juncture? And were there any concealed gatherings? Let us discover the covert briefings that initiated the royal banishment. The initial indication that something singular was developing appeared in early November when a tiny faction of MPs obtained requests to attend a private meeting at the Cabinet Office. Official logs labeled it an ambiguous security discussion, sufficient to keep the media away. Participants comprised senior Home Affairs Committee figures, intelligence officers, and a handful of constitutional guides whose duty was comprehending the fragile equilibrium between Crown and State. What they witnessed that night altered everything. Intelligence dossiers gathered over the previous 8 months unveiled a worrying trend. Even for those accustomed to Sussex scandals, the presentation revealed organized media operations intended to weaken specific royals, particularly Catherine. It highlighted financial connections between PR agencies linked to the Sussexes and platforms famous for disseminating untrue or deceptive narratives. Most frightening were correspondences demonstrating that Harry and Meghan's staff had debated possible documentary initiatives with international press. These were actions that, in one expert's view, could unbalance the monarchy from outside the country. Technically, none of this behavior was against the law. However, in a nation where the crown is a constitutional foundation, the consequences were grave. 1 megapixel subsequently characterized the atmosphere in the chamber as resembling a burial service. This was not tabloid theater any longer. He remarked privately, "We were staring at something that could shatter the bond between Crown and Parliament if ignored." 3 weeks afterward, a subsequent gathering occurred at a protected Westminster site. By this time, the group had expanded to involve senior leaders from both primary parties. A scarce exhibition of bipartisan accord in contemporary British politics. The Sussex predicament had morphed into something larger than politics, for it was a constitutional danger. Prince William was engaged behind the curtains. He did not go to meetings or persuade MPs personally, but his private aide conveyed reports to essential lawmakers. He emphasized the palace's worries and, significantly, made it plain that the royal clan would not obstruct any legislative remedy. That guarantee was critical. Without it, Parliament could never have proceeded. Princess Anne also enacted her role. At a confidential supper with high-ranking ministers in late November, she uttered a comment that left those attending disturbed. Organizations endure by realizing when to cut off a limb. She stated, no additional clarification was required. Everybody comprehended she was alluding to Harry and Meghan. It was clear that the royal family, usually wary of political interference, was silently supporting the most drastic alternative. In early December, a subcommittee dossier on foreign influence schemes dropped a clue that British citizens were involved in media pursuits that could weaken the frameworks of a major American partner. The document did not mention Harry and Meghan, but it arrived at the Home Secretary immediately and altered the whole assessment. A domestic royal saga had transformed into an international security issue. The banishment bill was written in total concealment. A tiny squad of parliamentary attorneys and constitutional historians devised wording that could endure legal disputes. They depended on a little-known 1703 precedent never utilized against royals but legally sound. By the beginning of December, the proposal was prepared. Velocity was essential. Postponements risked disclosures, public strain, and meddling that could wreck the ballot. The concluding shove arrived when King Charles permitted the publication of private letters between himself and Harry. These messages covered 18 months, displaying frequent cautions regarding the results of persistent assaults on the royal household. Strategically leaked to chosen reporters, the missives changed public sentiment significantly. Surveys in the constituency 48 hours prior to the vote indicated robust backing for firm parliamentary measures, particularly among electors over 50. Even younger advocates of the Sussexes had become cautious, with 42% supporting exile steps. By the dawn of the vote, the outcome was inevitable. When the concluding difference surpassed predictions, it transmitted a distinct message. Britain's tolerance had finished. Harry and Meghan, from their California refuge, had underestimated the determination of an entire royal clan. But were Harry and Meghan cognizant of what was approaching next? Let us take a nearer examination. Throughout late autumn, those near the Sussexes depicted a residence existing in a sphere of presumed safety. Meghan specifically projected a self-assurance that appeared unbreakable. She trusted that public sentiment, notably in America, would function as a guard, sheltering them from any grave repercussions. Over the preceding 3 years, she had meticulously constructed a story portraying them as casualties of an antiquated, prejudiced establishment. That tale had resonated with specific factions, especially younger Americans and liberal media platforms who adopted it completely. Yet, she missed a crucial fact. For no matter how convincing a narrative is, reality has a method of catching up. Harry's situation was more complex. Having matured within the structure, he understood its internal mechanisms, its strains, and its ability for frigid, deliberate reactions when endangered. However, somewhere along the path, that comprehension had soured into disdain. Acquaintances who had known him prior to his wedding described a male who had always chafed against royal limitations but had never genuinely thought the institution would revolt against him. Being born royal, he reasoned, bestowed upon him a type of lasting protection, something Meghan as a newcomer could never possess. The initial alarm signals emerged in October. Several of their essential media partners in Britain started quietly retracting backing. These were not antagonistic tabloids or detractors. They were reporters who had previously supported the pair, penned favorable biographies, and guarded them against assaults. One by one, they began rejecting interview inquiries, withdrawing from Sussex-related reports, and privately voicing worry that the story had become too poisonous to manage. One reporter, talking months afterward on condition of secrecy, clarified the change. "We began hearing rumors from inside Parliament. Not gossip but actual solid data that something major was being debated. As journalists who prize access, we had to perform calculations. Backing Harry and Meghan endangered our connections with government and palace contacts. For many of us, that exchange no longer made logic." The second alert arrived as legal notifications. In early November, Harry's British legal squad obtained a strict message from the Home Office asking for explanation on items regarding his residency, security plans, and current lawsuits against UK media platforms. The letter's style was bureaucratic, nearly ordinary, but the signal was distinct. The administration was assessing his status, and this was no standard review. Harry responded by directing his attorneys to resist forcefully, handling the query as just another instance of institutional bullying. Meghan, attending these talks, supported this posture. She viewed any suggestion of surrender as confirmation of the palace's methods. What neither of them understood was that the Home Office query was not bullying, it was readiness. The state was systematically establishing the foundation for rulings that would demand thorough legal defense. Harry's aggressive reaction, ironically, made it simpler to justify the final result. The third alert was impossible to disregard. In late November, William allowed a scarce interview with a top political reporter. While the discussion supposedly centered on his expanded royal tasks, one solitary sentence sent tremors among those who comprehended royal communication. "There arrives a moment," William stated cautiously, "when defending the establishment necessitates hard choices that prior generations evaded." He never named Harry, yet everybody grasped the significance. In California, nevertheless, the caution was rejected. Meghan told pals that William was merely acting, attempting to seem resolute to a British populace losing belief in the crown. Harry decoded it as proof of his siblings' aspiration and readiness to forfeit family for authority. Neither pondered the other option, that William was not intimidating but knowledgeable that the ruling had already been finalized and that the apparatus of repercussion was already moving. Harry and Meghan answered via their PR squad. They would not be quieted. They would not apologize for speaking the truth. And they would not negotiate with a system designed to suppress them. According to insiders, the intermediary handling the message closed the communication channel and told associates they have no idea what is coming. On the morning of December 3rd, as MPs filed into Westminster to cast their votes, Harry and Meghan were in California still treating the unfolding events as another chapter in an ongoing drama. But when the vote passed, the shock was complete. It was not because they were ignorant of the proposal, But because they had persuaded themselves it would flop. They trusted Britain, for all its noise, would never actually banish a prince and his American spouse. They presumed global shame would hinder it and that Charles, despite everything, would intercede on Harry's behalf. They were incorrect on every point. As the truth landed over the subsequent hours, shock yielded to a chillier understanding. It was not remorse, at least not initially, but the admission that they had incinerated bridges so completely that no apology, lapse of time, or tactic could build a route back. For the initial time since departing Britain in 2020, Harry and Meghan confronted a horizon with no backup strategy. There was no exit path and no assurance about what would occur subsequently. What legal methods did the Parliament employ? Let us discover. On December 3rd, what transpired in Westminster was much more than political theater. It was a constitutional tremor that legal scholars will be analyzing for decades. Parliament elected to banish Harry and Meghan, activating legal instruments most people presumed belonged only to ancient history texts. In the view of legislators, the couple had stepped over a boundary no contemporary royal had ever neared. The legal foundation for the exile stems from a peculiar section of British constitutional law. Unlike nations with written constitutions that clearly set out powers, Britain relies on centuries of precedent and parliamentary supremacy. In simple terms, Parliament can pass almost any law it wants if it can gather enough votes. The law used for the Sussexes' exile was originally created centuries ago to protect the nation during political crisis. It gave Parliament the power to banish people whose actions were seen as a threat to the country's security or stability. The statute was deliberately ambiguous because back then exactness in legal wording was deemed a liability. Modern scholars had assumed these powers were long outdated, replaced by human rights protections. December 3rd proved otherwise. The Home Office moved with astonishing speed. Within 6 hours of the vote, Harry and Meghan received formal notices through their lawyers. The documents totaling 47 pages spelled out the exile's terms in painstaking detail. They were prohibited from coming into the UK for a minimum of 10 years. Any effort to re-enter would result in instant detention and deportation. While their British passports were not formally annulled, global databases flagged them, warning border agents everywhere. Property confiscation followed just as rapidly. Frogmore Cottage, the Windsor residence they had inhabited, was formally repossessed by the Crown Estate. Before dusk, their possessions were listed, boxed, and put in protected storage for overseas transport. Security safeguards were ended immediately. Harry had long struggled in British tribunals for taxpayer-funded police guarding during trips. But that conflict became moot overnight. Intelligence exchange between British and American agencies on dangers against the Sussexes was also paused. While private American protection could still function, the removal of this connection eliminated a crucial level of safety. Financial ramifications were just as theatrical. Harry's remaining legacy from Queen Elizabeth, kept in trust and owed in future payments, was blocked awaiting legal assessment. Constitutional authorities rushed for comparisons. Edward VIII came nearest, but his 1936 resignation was voluntary and never formalized via parliamentary ballot. What made Harry and Meghan's instance historic was the combination of parliamentary deed, royal consent, and the resurrection of legal instruments believed long deceased. International law contributed further complexity. The European Convention on Human Rights, which Britain still observed after Brexit, could also offer specific grounds for legal dispute since the right to return to one's nation is deemed essential. British solicitors had foreseen these objections. The banishment did not bar Harry permanently. It was a time-constrained limit based on Parliament's evaluation of constitutional necessity. That slim difference provided sufficient legal armor to endure instant challenges. By the evening of December 3rd, as legal petitions started inundating London courts, one reality had become distinct. The connection between Britain and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex had altered permanently. For Harry, the profoundest injury was not legal or monetary, it was existential. He was born into a royal persona that could never be entirely discarded. Now, for the first occasion, that selfhood had been violently severed from the sole nation that could authenticate it. How did the royal family respond? Let us discover the quiet reaction from the royal household. After the parliamentary ballot, Buckingham Palace was strangely quiet. almost as if every motion had been practiced beforehand. There were no crisis gatherings, no desperate telephone calls, and no indications of a disaster in progress. The employees continued their tasks with the exactness of individuals who had long expected this result, as though every move had been coded in advance. In the private chambers of the senior royals, the response was not amazement or misery but something far weirder, almost disturbing comfort. King Charles occupied the day in Scotland adhering to his standard agenda without pause. He toured a Highland community initiative, traded short remarks with local leaders, and went back to Balmoral in the late afternoon. Observers remarked on no external hints of distress or delay. His countenance bore the recognizable calm exhaustion that had rested there over months. If he grieved his son, it was in private areas where nobody dared encroach. His muteness was intentional, cautiously arranged with counselors who realized that any noticeable feeling could be distorted. Display sadness, and he would be labeled frail; display ease, and he would be charged with malice. So he uttered nothing, permitting the parliamentary vote to talk for itself, silently indicating that Harry's destiny was no longer a subject needing royal remark. Prince William's reaction was even chillier. He passed the day at Windsor modifying his diary to fit obligations that would now rest more heavily on his back. When a private aide notified him of the vote count, William merely nodded once, said nothing, and went back to his papers. For him, Harry's banishment was not a family tragedy, it was a difficulty finally resolved. The monarchy was unable to function efficiently while Harry and Meghan wielded power from California. Now, at last, there was lucidity. Catherine, meanwhile, underwent a knot of emotions described by friends as sorrow moderated with realism. She had once attempted to build a bond with Meghan, efforts that were rejected and later converted into weapons in interviews depicting Catherine as frigid and aloof. Princess Anne continued in Edinburgh, performing her royal tasks with her signature effectiveness. When questioned about the parliamentary ruling, she provided a reply that later escaped and molded public conversation. Establishments persist by making difficult selections. Today Parliament made one. Her phrasing was meager, but it left no ambiguity. Anne viewed the exile as essential, not vengeful. Queen Camilla adopted a different method. She remained at Clarence House, said nothing openly, and missed all planned functions. But those near to her grasped that her silence possessed weight. She realized better than anybody the perilous precedent this vote established. The palace's formal announcement, issued at 14:30, was shocking in its shortness. The issue resolved by Parliament today is a constitutional matter outside the range of royal commentary. The family's attention stays on service to the country. 29 words, no reference to Harry, no voicing of remorse, no trace of feeling, just a clinical admission that the matter had shifted from royal hands to state control. Behind this public calm, however, private preparations were already proceeding. Advisors to Charles assessed succession rules to avoid legal doubts arising from Harry's banishment. William's squad aligned communication with government leaders, expecting prolonged media investigation. Across the royal residence, employees prepared for criticism from Sussex advocates, readying for claims that the monarchy had behaved with brutality. International responses increased the strain. In the United States, supportive press depicted the family as executioners of an antique penalty. CNN asked if the British monarchy held a position in a contemporary democracy. The New York Times ran an opinion piece illustrating the exile as evidence of institutional poison. For the palace, this commotion was anticipated. The plan was elementary: allow the noise to storm, present no reply, and let time dull the fury. Still, faint fractures emerged late in the evening at Balmoral. Charles was observed standing solitary by a window, gazing across the estate, his look impossible to decipher. William, too, displayed brief instance of fragility during a private chat with Catherine, accidentally heard by a walking staff member. He allegedly stated, "I did not desire it to arrive at this, but he left us no alternative." Even this scarce confession highlighted necessity, not sorrow. What does this banishment signify for Harry and Meghan's future? Let us take a closer view. As the winter sun sank behind Montecito on the 3rd of December, Harry and Meghan confronted a tomorrow more dubious than anything they had undergone since withdrawing from royal existence in 2020. The parliamentary ballot to banish them had not just shut a gate, it had sealed a whole hallway of potentials. They had long presumed those paths would stay open no matter how strained the family relations had grown. They had trusted on some tier that a return to Britain was perpetually feasible. That conviction expired at 11:43 that morning in Westminster. The functional repercussions struck instantly. Travel became far more tangled than they had ever fancied. Though both possessed valid passports, Harry's flagged condition meant added investigation at every frontier. Nations with tight intelligence links to Britain or extradition treaties might now handle him as a security worry. Invitations to European functions, once standard, would demand careful checking, leaving hosts anxious about diplomatic consequences. Financial strains, already considerable, intensified. The couple's earnings had depended heavily on their royal link, telling insider anecdotes, and positioning themselves as voices exposing institutional faults. Exile altered that formula. They were no longer courageous whistleblowers, they were banished former royals. A classification that tends to elicit pity rather than revenue. Media collaborators like Netflix and Spotify would now have to rethink if the Sussex label still possessed the commercial merit it once did. For their kids, Archie and Lilibet, the risks extended across decades. Both held dual American and British citizenship. But the exile, while not legally obligatory on them, cast a large shadow. Would they be embraced in Britain as adults? Or would their parents' banishment trail them perpetually, shutting doors to cousins and grandparents they might otherwise have met? The psychological impacts would appear steadily, but trauma experts would detect the indications instantly. Harry, after 40 years defined by his royal self, even in defiance, suddenly had to face a world without Britain. He had to live without the palace, without the very establishment that had molded him. Meghan's situation was distinct but no less intricate. She had joined the royal clan as an outsider, endured what she characterized as prejudiced and unkind handling, and constructed a public existence revealing it. For some, the banishment might look like justification, a verification of the poison she had long alleged. But exile also signified failure, an incapacity to steer through a system that numerous women before her had outlasted. In Hollywood, where results matter more than ethics, failure is infrequently pardoned. The repercussions stretched internationally. The United States administration, officially impartial, quietly sensed strain from British diplomats to watch Sussex actions. While direct constraints were improbable, the signal was distinct. Content attacking the British monarchy could spark diplomatic trouble. Even soft power has boundaries, even for Americans wedded to exiled princes. For the monarchy, the banishment resolved a demanding issue. Harry and Meghan could no longer weaken the institution from the inside. But it generated new weaknesses. International critique was severe. Younger generations, particularly outside Britain, viewed the action as evidence that the monarchy was archaic, vengeful, and unable to adapt. Those views would not vanish rapidly. Prince William, now heir without a rival sibling, confronted a different sort of inspection. He would be assessed not just on his own guidance but on whether the monarchy he would one day command could validate the frigidity displayed to Harry. So, what do you reflect about the startling action by the UK Parliament to banish Harry and Meghan from Britain? Please share your concepts with us in the comments area below. Do not forget to like the video to support us. Also, remember to subscribe for more updates.